Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and how great to have as our guest today Mr. Gerald Celente. Gerald's a publisher and editor of the Trends Research Journal, founder and director of the Trends Research Institute. He's the man who discovers and communicates to the rest of us the trends that are going on in the economy and the world. And Gerald, you sent out a very interesting little op-ed this morning about the migrant crisis. What's going on, what might be the cause of it, what to do about it.
Yes, when we're looking at what's going on, this was in motion since actually when the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Barack Obama, launched the war against Libya, of course, under the guise of a humanitarian mission. It used to be that they used to use the excuse of bringing freedom and democracy to another nation as the reason to attack and have regime change. But that one was launched, actually initiated by Sarkozy of France and Cameron of the UK, and pushed by Obama. And behind the scenes, the big pushers, of course, were Hillary Clinton, Samantha Powers, and Susan Rice. So what happened is when they overthrew Gaddafi, and remember, this is 2011, as the Arab Spring is heating up throughout the region, the regime change brought down the Gaddafi government. And when Gaddafi was in power, people weren't leaving the shores of Tripoli from Africa and other nations into Europe. He was keeping them out. He had made a deal with Italy and other countries that they would no longer flow out of Libya into their countries. So as a consequence of that wonderful humanitarian mission, in which tens of thousands were slaughtered in Libya, and now, of course, it's in civil war, totally destabilized, once the richest country in North Africa, and the region around it being destabilized from Tunisia, and of course, France going down into Mali. I guess they can't get over that French imperialism trip from the earlier 19th century. Now that whole region is destabilized. So we have the wars going on now in Yemen, which Saudi Arabia officially launched from Washington, D.C. on March 26th of this year, of which the United States is part of. Matter of fact, the king of Saudi Arabia was just in the United States, and the military-industrial complex just rang up sales of several $billions to the king in more armaments to slaughter people in the poorest nation of the Middle East. So in talking about the migrant crisis, we have to put the pieces together, which the media refuses to do. So we could begin with Libya, because that's when the crisis really began. People flooding out of there onto the shores of Europe. Then, of course, Iraq. The ongoing war launched under lies in 2003 by President George Bush, Dick Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, the whole crew of liars, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, that next mushroom cloud you see. And we have those refugees. The refugees, again, when you look at the media, they're coming in from Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and Syria. Those are the primary nations. All of those nations have been destabilized, destroyed by the United States and its coalition of the killing. Now, layer on top of that what's going on in other African nations, from Sudan, Somalia, from Central Africa. I mentioned Mali, Nigeria, Ghana. Throughout that region, Congo, destabilization now made worse because a lot of these countries were resource rich. So if they were rich in oil or copper or iron or uranium, Niger, any of these countries, now their commodity prices are at 16-year lows. So their economies are collapsing. The corrupt governments are waging war. It's a civil war, and they're flowing into Europe as well. So what we have, Lou, is a worldwide crisis, a migrant flood. It's the worst since World War II, and we are forecasting that it's going to far surpass it, and it's going to cause geopolitical and economic calamity. And I could add one other element to show you how serious it is. It took they say that humans were put on the planet 100,000 years ago. So for argument's sake, we'll say, okay, it took from 100,000 years ago to 1900 to put 1.6 billion people on the planet. We now have 7.2 billion. So when we talk about a refugee crisis, we're talking about people not only flooding out of all of these war-torn and economically ravaged nations from Africa and the Middle East. Let's go south of the border. Look at Mexico. The peso now is at all-time lows against the dollar. The Brazilian real, 37-month low. From Australia, their currency is down, 20% to Canada in a recession. Their Canadian dollar is at 2004 lows. Colombia, Bolivia, Chile, every one of these resource-rich nations, their currencies are crashing because their commodity prices are plunging. There's a global economic recession, and they too are going to be looking to leave their poverty nations to make a living in a country near you, and America's one of them.
Gerald, isn't this a design program by the United States empire? I mean, I know Berlusconi, the former prime minister of Italy, warned Obama and Hillary if in an overthrowing Gaddafi, it would lead to this vast migrant crisis because he'd had an agreement with Gaddafi to prevent it from happening. Don't they want to bring about chaos? Don't they feel this is the way that the U.S. can control Europe, can control America for that matter, the U.S. government, the whole power elite, that this sort of destructionism, which you've mentioned in all these various countries, wrought by the U.S. empire in the name of humanitarianism and freedom and other laws, isn't this deliberate? Ann Williamson, the great Russian scholar, I know was the first one to point this out to me, that this seems to be a deliberate policy by the U.S. empire and its allies to wreck the world, the better to control it.
Well, of course, with the Middle East, there's no question about that. We remember Netanyahu appearing before the Congress in the late, I believe it was 1999, 2000, leading up to the Iraq War, saying how Saddam Hussein had to go. And it's been that policy as well to destabilize that area. So there's absolutely no question about that. On the other element of it, these are losers they're maniacs in charge of government. You look what's going on with Donald Trump. The reason he's able to run all over these guys is because he's running against a bunch of little boys. And I'm certainly not making a case for him. I mean, he's not the kind of guy I like. Talking about Berlusconi, we could call him Donald Berlusconi Trump. The same reason why the Italians voted for Berlusconi. They thought he was a billionaire. They were going to get rich too. But the point that I'm making is we have a bunch of liars, losers, cowards, freaks, and fools that are running our country. Look at them. They're a bunch of little boys and girls. These are not bright people. Look, we all saw that audio tape and saw the videotape of Victoria Nuland, our Assistant Secretary of State, on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt, the ambassador to Ukraine, setting up the overthrow of the Yanukovych government. And what does she tell him? F you to the UK. I mean, you heard it, you saw it. You saw her passing out cookies along with Pyatt at the rebellion in Ukraine leading up to the overthrow. You saw her on YouTube addressing in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Press Corps on December 13th, 2013, leading up to the overthrow. Brought to you by Chevron on one side, Exxon on the other side, saying the path for Ukraine is the one set forth by the IMF. It's right in front of our faces. These are cowards, freaks, liars, and fools, and they're destroying our nation. They're sociopaths and psychopaths. They're sick SOBs, and no one wants to call them what they are. I can tell you a quick story. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who, there's no one I admire more for his geopolitical and economic insights. We're on the phone one day, and there was a crisis going on in Washington. And I said to him, Craig, I'm looking at the New York Times, and I'm looking at Obama's, national security team and his staff around him. I said, are these the clowns making decisions, or is there something else going on behind the scenes? Now, this is a man, of course, that was the Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, and also a man that could and did call in the director of the CIA and question him under oath, a guy on the inside. He said to me, Gerald, he said, what you see is what it is. He said, these people are setting the policy. Do other things happen after that is done? He said, yes. But these are the people that are charting the course. And it's like the Wizard of Oz. There's an old man behind the curtain with a dog. That's all it is.
Aren't there power elite interests, the bankers, the military-industrial complex? Don't they help pick these government officials?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I mean, look, Lou, I mean, we've been around, I mean, we always talk about Eisenhower's great farewell address, where he warned us that the military industrial complex was going to rob the nation of the genius of the scientists, sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children. And this is a 5-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, and 2-term president. Not one of these little boys who can't fight their way out of a paper bag. This is a man that hated war and saw the destruction of it. And when you tell people about it, they go, oh, yeah, what's for lunch? It just blows over their brain. Yeah, really. The military industrial complex is running this country. There's no question about it. And the other moneyed interests, as you mentioned. Look, nothing has really changed since the days of Jesus Christ chasing the money changers out of the temple with a whip. And by the way, when people say to me, Mr. Celente, you get angry when you speak out sometimes, you should calm down. I say, listen, if Jesus Christ could become violent and drive the money changers out with a whip, I could become angry at them, because that's all this is. They just changed their names. They're the Goldman Sachs gang, the Merrill Lynch mob, the JP Morgan Chase gang. That's all this is. So you're 100%, I agree with you. It's the bankers, it's the moneyed interests, and it's the military-industrial complex.
But none of these people seem to have, even from their own standpoint, I would argue, any kind of long-term view that's just however they can, the most money and power right now, even though they're doing things that are going to dramatically hurt the level of civilization.
Again, that's why I said that you have to, as I look at it, you look at the psychological behavior of them. And they're sociopaths and psychopaths. Sociopaths are never sorry about what they do or admit to anything.
That's true.
And they're power hungry. I remember when the first day after Rand Paul announced his nomination and he was being questioned on NBC. And they asked him, they said, did you always want to run for office? And he said, well, for presidency. He said, no, I wanted to run for office, but he said words to the effect that, I speak to a lot of the people out there, and they say that, everybody that's running now wanted to run for president since they were in the 8th grade. Now, those are his words, since the 8th grade. That's the mentality that you're dealing with. You're dealing with deranged people that are power hungry, that have they're driven narcissistic people. I really would love to see a top psychologist do profiles on these people, and they'd be in Bellevue.
We can in effect do the profiles ourselves. I always recommend that people look in Wikipedia at narcissistic personality disorder, and you look at the various things that characterize that disorder. It's politicians, among other people.
Yeah, I began my career. I was the assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate at 23 years old. At a graduate school, I began to run political campaigns in Westchester County, which in that time, of course, was the richest county in the United States. And I also designed and instructed American politics and campaign technology at St. John's University. My job in the Senate was the worst job I ever had. I left there very quickly. I hated it. I'd be, a young guy, you're talking in the back of the chamber with your buddy. What do you talk about? Sports and girls. You're 23 years old. And a senator would walk in, my friend would leave me, and follow him like a little puppy dog, the senator, and pull out the chair. One friend after another, as the senators came in, and push the chair in to help the senator sit down. And I'd stay in the back over there. And they'd come back, and I say to him, hey, what's the matter with you guys? I said, what's the matter? The cat can't sit down by himself. He needs some help. And they said, Gerald, if you have that kind of attitude, you're not going to make it here. And I said, listen, that's not the way I was raised. I'll never do that. My mother, may her soul rest in peace, before I knew what the word meant, she told me she hated cowards. And I would never do anything to disrespect my mother in that way. So that's what that life is out there. You have a bunch of little lowlifes that look up to these politicians. Think about it. Think about what the founding fathers would feel if they saw a red carpet rolled out for George Washington. It would be a disgrace. Everything that they fought for, everything to kill us, to destroy the royalty that was ruling us has now been reinstituted. Congress and the president are the new royalty. It's a neo-feudal society. There are separate rules for we, the slaves of Slavelandia, and the big guys, the political nobility and the economic elites get a free ride. Look what happened with that with six banks were convicted, not charged, convicted of felonies for rigging the interest rates, the LIBOR rates, and the Forex markets, the currency markets. 6. Not one white shoe boy on Wall Street's head rolled. Nada. But don't go over that yellow line. How many glasses, do you have anything to drink today? Where'd you come from? You had your brights on when that car was coming, right? You didn't have your signal light on. They break our chops for the smallest little things, and they give the political elite and the economic nobility a free ride. The founding fathers would be turning in their grave if they've seen what happened to this country.
Well, Gerald, here we're facing the monsters in charge, and I certainly agree with that. Whether it's in Europe, Germany, Italy, America, France, England, the bad guys are in charge everywhere. What does this mean for our economic future? We've talked about the migrant crisis, and of course that interacts with the economic future, but what's ahead?
We see the markets collapsing, and it's very difficult because, for example, you see the markets going up and down on the hopes that, quote, of more stimulus from Asia. So we never know when the date for the collapse is going to come, but we feel it's imminent, and it will happen before the end of the year. I mentioned the commodity price collapse. I mentioned the currency price collapse. And you could add this up, by the way, and you can see there's another element to it. History is repeating itself. You had the crash of 1929, the Great Depression, currency wars, trade wars, world wars, the Panic of '08, the Great Recession, currency wars. You hear people screaming about the low currencies from China and other countries in hopes of propping up their exports, trade wars. World war is on the horizon. These all come together. They're not separate. So we're looking at, look, I never have seen a summer of economic volatility like the one that we're in now. Never. I never saw an August like this one that just happened, and it began in mid-June as the Shanghai index began to collapse. And it's now down 41% despite the Chinese government doing everything they can possibly do to rig the market, from throwing in over $200 billion, prohibiting short selling, pulling some 50% of the shares off the market during the volatility so they couldn't be traded, on and on and on. Can't sell grade A stocks until another 6 months, and still the volatility. Look at the oil prices, and then put that on another layer. Right here in the United States, that oil boom, the shale boom, look how much of the bonds, junk bonds, are in the energy sector, between 15 to 20%. And energy prices are collapsing. And when all else fails, Lew, they take you to war. You want to get the people's mind off the problems? How about a terror attack, false flag or real? Look what happened with 9/11. The evening Bush gets on the television, and 9 days later when he addresses the nation, I remember writing in the Trends Journal, only a madman would speak these words, and only a country terrorized by fear would believe them. Not one fact as to why we should invade Afghanistan. Not one. They'll do the same thing again.
And where will it be? Is it going to be Iran? Are they going to end up nuking Iran?
I think it'll probably be, just to put things into context. You saw what happened in France when an estimated 17 people were purportedly killed. The people ended up losing their rights, clamped down. Up in Canada, 1 was killed, same thing. Although, some 300,000 Syrians have been killed, already some 6,000 people in Yemen who've done nothing to anybody have been killed. They don't make the news. All you need is a couple of Americans killed. Look what the Boston Marathon did. They allowed the police warrantless searches to go into people's homes. Women coming out with their hands up, carrying children with one hand up. All it will take is a couple in the United States killed, very few people, Again, false flag are real, and this whole country will go on lockdown. Again, when all else fails, they take you to war. History is replete with it. The evidence is there, and I fear that's where it's coming, whether it's Iran, whether it's an explosion at an embassy, whether it's real or false flag, it makes no difference. Again, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. Hey, how about that Gulf of Tonkin incident that never happened the way they said it did? So you could see the destruction that they could do, the violence that is committed, the immorality that we live under, and the destruction of so many for lies by sociopaths, psychopaths, or liars, freaks, and fools, and the narcissists.
And certainly we've had the U.S. government, among many other governments, start a whole bunch of wars, always blaming it on somebody else. In that case, we were supposed to be terrorized because the North Vietnamese were sending speedboats out against the U.S. destroyers. And it's always, these are always, of course, much poorer people. They won't be attacking Russia, I think, for that reason, because they have similar sorts of military technology. But it'll be another Iran, like it was Afghanistan, Iraq, as you say, Yemen, Libya. It's going to be some easy to kill country.
Yes, and here's the other thing. When we talk about the destabilization, they've killed an estimated 1 million people in Iraq on a war based on lies. How come as I mentioned, this is a neo-feudal society. How come there are no war crime tribunals? Who knew what when? I want to know who knew what when. That we launched a war and we're still there. We're going to save them Yazidis on the mountain. That's what Obama was saying.
Yes.
Remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody knew what a Yazidi was and still don't. But it was an excuse, again, under the humanitarian guise. So if I was an Iraqi and somebody came and killed my family and destroyed my country, you'd think I'd want to get even and blow their brains out? But in the exceptionals' minds, no, that's not prohibited. The exceptionals could kill anybody that they want, destroy any nation that they want, and there's no such thing as payback. Or as we used to say in the Bronx, payback's a bitch.
In fact, there's not even any such thing as self-defense. In fact, to have a defense against possible American or Israeli or whatever attack is itself a crime. You're not allowed to defend yourself.
No.
You must be open before the U.S. bombing you and killing you.
Yeah, well, again, you mentioned Israel. Look what they're doing now. They're trying to pass a law that in occupied territories, that kids that throw stones at occupying soldiers can now be shot.
Or tanks or whatever, yes.
Yeah, at tanks, at anything, throwing stones. So that's the mentality that we keep sinking to. And again, as you well know, that's why we're launching Occupy Peace. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts wrote a piece about how people saying the peace movement is dead. And here we are a few days before 9/11. And you remember why they attacked us for 9/11, quote, because they hate our freedom.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have to worry about that. It's not an excuse anymore. They took our freedom away. So why are we waging the war on terror? We have no more freedom. They're listening to us right now. They watch everything that we do. They fill us up when we go to the airport, x-ray us. So what freedom? So here we are, 9/11, 14 years later, there's no peace movement. And Dr. Paul Craig Roberts wrote that, commentators are saying the peace movement is dead. And we're reviving it. We're holding Occupy Peace, as you know, on September 20th at Colonial Kingston, New York, at the most historic Four Corners, the only place where there's a pre-Revolutionary War stone building on each corner, to honor thy founding fathers, beginning with Washington, a true warrior, not these little boys that play commander-in-chief, shoot pool and play basketball and drive pickup trucks and play golf, a guy that led the troops, a warrior. His farewell address, no foreign entanglement. Madison, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, every one of the founding fathers were wise enough not to get involved in another nation's affairs. And the world was at war big time back then. Only the means of delivery of the weapons have changed. So that's what Occupy Peace is about. Close all the bases overseas, secure the homeland, put the troops to work rebuilding our third world infrastructure rather than highways in Afghanistan, and force Congress to vote for war. They have not voted for war, as you well know, since World War II. And to have on each state ballot a referendum where we, the people, will tell Congress how to vote. Because Congress doesn't represent us. They represent the people that give them the most amount of money. They call it campaign contributions. Adults call it bribes and payoffs. Their kids don't fight. They get in the back lines, like Al Gore was public relations in Vietnam. And so they're not on, they take the poor kids who are joining the service because they can't find a job and want to think they're going to get an education and have some benefits. So that's what Occupy Peace is. There's never been a movement like this with an action plan. And we're kicking it off on September 20th. And the website is occupypeace.us. This isn't a .com. This is .us. Any nation wants to do their own, let them do their own. I'm an American. My blood is Italian, but my heart's American. I can never be me if I was born anywhere else. And I thank God I was born American, and I am insulted by these people that are doing everything they can to destroy the land of opportunity. And the reason why all our parents, grandparents came here for the freedom that we used to cherish, that is being stolen from us by a bunch of little boys with bad attitudes and sick minds. I will fight for peace, but I'm not going to die for war.
Well, Gerald, we'll alert everybody on this podcast as well to occupypeace.us, to the Trends Journal, to all the work you do. And thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, I'm honored to be on with you, Lew, and thank you so much for all you do and the Mises Institute in spreading the word of freedom like very, very few do. No one I know, actually, that does it like you guys do. So thank you very much, and for me being a part of it.
Great to have you, Gerald. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the LRC front page. Thank you.